Hello everyone, this is Dr. Taskeen and I welcome you all on Homeopathy Musings. Today we have with us a very special guest, Patricia Hatherly. I welcome you on Homeopathy Musings. She's going to be taking a very interesting topic, is the stipulation outlined in Aphorism 9 attained in 21st century. So we have this topic for our today's session. I hope you all are looking forward to it. But before we begin, I'll take a few moments of yours, few seconds of yours maybe. So about the speaker, Patricia has been practicing homeopathy since 1995. She is a well-known both in Australia and overseas as clinician, educator, and author. She's conducted several proving and is the author of the Homeopathic Physician's Guide to Lactation, and also to Lax, a Materia Medica and Repertory. Patricia has spent nearly 50 years of her life working with mothers and babies, and nearly 20 of them as an internationally accredited lactation consultant. And at this, plus the years spent as childbirth educator, which particularly informed her fascination to primal, period, and milk in particular. And I am very excited for the topic she's going to be taking today. So looking forward to it. Before we move on, I'll just highlight our few upcoming courses, in particular on homeopathy musing. The full spectrum pediatric course, which we are eagerly waiting for part 2. Part 1 has been already done by Dr. Dhanipkar sir. In case you are interested, the recordings will be accessible to you. The part 2, we are aiming to cover all the aspects of pediatric practice, and it's really starting soon from the 8th of March. I am looking forward to people who can register, and we have a special course for our students on special demand from classroom to clinic to bridge the gap between the classroom knowledge and how to apply it into clinical use. So it will have total 12 sessions and we are starting in May. We also have lanthanize as a very special topic with Dr. Jonathan Hardy, sir, and it will be starting in July from the 31st of July. We'll have total 4 sessions for the same. And also a topic on anxiety and panic, a 360-degree approach to anxiety and panic, which will be taken by Dr. Aradhana Chitra ma'am. And it also contains total 4 sessions. All the courses that I mentioned have the registrations are open for the same. We can share the links to the same. In case of any questions or queries, you can contact us. And we are also happy to announce that we've launched a website. I will share the link with you for the website as well. And you can go ahead and see whatever interests you. You can pick and choose from our alaka. Without wasting any further time, I will stop sharing and I'll hand over to ma'am. And just a quick reminder that please avoid scribbling on the screen, or do not unmute yourself when the speaker is speaking. In case you have any questions or queries, write in the chat box and we'll address it at the end. Okay, without further time, I will hand over. I invite you, ma'am, forward to begin with today's session.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
So I'll share my screen. Oh, host has disabled.
Yes. You can do it right.
Try again.
You're not able to? Can you
try
please try again? Yeah.
There we go. Right. Slideshow. I'm beginning. There we go. All right. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining in to this conversation we're going to have about aphorism number 9. A lot has changed since Hanuman's day, and I think you would all agree that we're really very much up against it these days in trying to maintain a very healthy instrument, which is what he was really outlining in that aphorism. So this is the part that, I want to focus on when he says, in the healthy living state, our indwelling rational spirit can freely avail itself of this living, healthy instrument for the higher purpose of our existence. Now, he was a God-fearing man, and he probably meant, we'll go to heaven. But these days we would say, perhaps we would be self-realized. So let's do a little bit more of a deep dive on that, because there's quite a few elephants in the room when it comes to this situation. Big one is autism. So back in 83, there were 1 in 10,000 children on the spectrum. We were having 10 vaccines back then. By 2023, it was 1 in 36, and the vaccine schedule had crept up to 74. And now it's 1 in 33, especially in the young children, and this is research published by JAMA. Recent data shows that autism rates increased 26% from 2018 to 2020, and 1 in 30 now children ages 3 to 17 are diagnosed, and the greater prevalence is among the Black, Hispanic, and the Asian children. So what's going on here? People say it's autism that cause vaccines that cause autism, pardon me. But when autism first raised its head back in the 30s, it was described as a mismothering syndrome. Okay, maybe that's partly true. But these days, the whole emphasis is on, no, it's a vaccine-driven syndrome. But you have to say, well, if it's a vaccine-driven syndrome, why don't all children who get vaccines go onto the spectrum? And the short answer to that is because those who don't are resilient. So this is what we need to look at. What is doing resilience in the head in these days? What's going on in our society that's making children less robust, less resilient, less able to deal with what the vaccines are doing? So it's oxytocin, and I'm going to talk a lot about that because it governs the metabolic pathway of homeostasis, and it's homeostasis that helps us to be resilient and to be social. And I really admire the work of Dr. Michel Odent. You may have heard of him or may not. He's French. He started out life as a surgeon, and he got sick of doing cesarean sections, so he became an obstetrician. And in the 80s, he ran a very famous birthing centre in Pithiviers in France, and women from all around the world came to birth with him because it was very much mother-baby centred rather than institution-centred. And he's well published, and he's written a lot of books, mostly on oxytocin. And now in his 90s, he's looking back with a little bit of dismay because of what's been happening. And this latest book, Childbirth and the Evolution of Homo sapiens, he's arguing that because we have a rise in IVF and we have medicalised and electrocesarean births on the rise, and there's lack of or insufficient breastfeeding. And now you need to keep in mind that primates, according to anthropologists, lactate for 6 times the gestation rate. That may shock you, but that's the bottom line. And if you go among the Kung or into the Amazon where people are living a nomadic life, women feed their babies for that long or they die. That's Mother Nature. So Michel is saying that we're now getting this big shift in the species. And he says this is due to a lack of exposure to oxytocin, as well as interference with the priming of the receptors. This is what happens in this time of neuroplasticity, what we call the primal period, which is from conception till fall, which is the time of weaning. And he's now saying that with this new paradigm, we're now getting a rise of individuals along the autism spectrum. And he's saying that man will become an individual with a body and a brain, but no emotional body. And you can read more about him, and he has an amazing database if you go to this website here. So it really is all about oxytocin. So it's lack of physiologic conception, physiologic birth, and physiologic nurture. These are the fundamental drivers about where we're at. And this is what's going to be the big focus of my conversation with you tonight. So the GIT and autism, there's a link there. So research has shown that high levels of linoleic acid in cord blood lead to increased autism severity. And this is raising concerns about processed foods and seed oils in our modern diets. And Studies reveal that the infant gut microbiome composition, particularly there is a decrease in the beneficial bacteria Akkermansia and also Capricosis, and these are also linked to later autism development. So, a healthy living state requires a robust constitution. We would all agree on that. And so let's have a quick look at constitutional remedies. So they're mainly found among the minerals, especially carbons. Calc carb and calc phos are our most common constitutional remedies. Nat carb and baryta carb are also in the mix. And I'll just mention here that if you're dealing with a baryta carb child and you're considering a lac, have a good look at lacacinum because of its theme of obstinacy. Very useful in the baryta carb child. But silica constitutions are now becoming much more predominant because the human race is succumbing to, it's being hijacked by Silicon Valley, and constitutions are weakening. And so Sanicular Aqua is a remedy that I have, over all the years I've been in practice working with mums and bubs, I've used this a lot. Ailments from a poor diet, that is insufficient time at the breast, that's the bottom line with this one. So what can affect the constitution? Well, the sexual history of the parents can, because epigenetic threads are expressed in the microRNA of body fluids, that's the ovum and the sperm. So the health of the parents at the time of conception is really important. So is the folinic acid status of both parents. Now, folinic acid is the activated form of folate, and I say that it should be emphasized for at least 3 months prior to conception because both the parents contribute genetic material, and folate affects messenger RNA, so it has a really important role to play in the moderation of the DNA, especially where there's tubercular miasm, because we don't want a midline abnormality occurring. And the zinc status of both parents is very important because zinc is stored in the gonads, so that's the testes and the ovaries. Now, this is an interesting slide showing connection to that. This comes from the IVF space, and researchers say that when the egg and the sperm in the test tube, in the petri dish, are doing their thing, if they observe what they call the zinc spark, there it is there, which can happen about 40 seconds into the entry. If that comes like that, they know that this conceptus is going to be a healthy one, and they will use this one for implantation. So the talk has published some very interesting research back in 2017 with Mahesh. How can healthier children be born? A hypothesis on how to create a better human race. And he says that the most robust children are conceived when both parents are lost in each other in an erotic climax. Yeah. So what he's talking about there is oxytocin. It's really, really important. So if conception is associated with an erotic climax, then oxytocin, which is the neurotransmitter which regulates homeostasis, which is SORA, it's got an important role to play here. So we need to give consideration to IVF and all forms of surrogacy. Now, in Australia, I don't know what it's like in your country, but in Australia, 1 in 6 couples now seek help. And IVF conceptions here are 1 in 18. It's a very lucrative industry. Profits are about 1.5 billion. In a recent study, if you're going to have to deal with this kind of situation with couples that have not been able to conceive, they're definitely going to do the IVF thing. You've got to make sure that they've got enough magnesium on board, also enough selenium, because that optimizes the uptake of magnesium. Got to make sure that there's plenty of vitamin D and also iodine, especially if the woman's a sepia woman, because the thyroid's really important for a pregnancy and also for lactogenesis. Now, interestingly, when we talk about so many babies being conceived by IVF, there was some research done, Uni of Minnesota, and they published it in JAMA in 2019. And it says that just under 20% of children who are conceived by IVF are at risk of cancer in the first 5 years of life. That's not a healthy instrument. What needs to be kept in mind here is that because the microRNA of the body fluids carry the epigenetic imprints going back at least 3 generations, ancestors matter. You know, the epigenetic thread, especially through the maternal line, goes down all of those generations, passed from grandmother to mother to the mother of the pregnant baby. So you can see there in that lovely meme how important this is. So what are we doing, you know, in buying eggs and hiring uteruses and buying sperm? Now, this is becoming quite a complex matter. So this is the oxytocin molecule. It's got basic elements of oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, all those bases there. A little bit of sulfur here in the middle, which is why I link it to Sora. And when I first saw this, I thought, oh my goodness, it looks like a snake. And then when you look at the carrier protein, this came from Wikipedia Commons, I thought, oh, it looks like the dragon on Chinese New Year. So what's that all about? Well, interestingly, every culture on the planet has some kind of serpentine myth associated with culture and creation. So in the Sumerians, we have the double-headed snake. Chinese had one. The Aztecs gave us the feathered serpent. The Phoenicians, the Ouroboros. Greeks have one. And in Australia here, we've got the rainbow serpent. So this is kind of interesting because it does mimic DNA. DNA is very kind of serpentine in a way. It undulates, it goes left to right, which is why alternating sides is a big keynote in the lax, and you'll get this left-right thing happening. So there is a connection here that we can have a look at. So we're talking here about creation. We're talking about the higher purpose of existence. Now, this is a really famous painting. It's on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican. So I guess you know about it. Hopefully you do. So this is the moment of creation when the Creator is instigating life into Adam, who represents universal man. And you'll notice that the Creator's finger is quite distinct, quite pointed, but Adam's is very, he has to lift his finger in order to make that connection. Apart from the fact that Adam's got an umbilicus, which means that Michelangelo thought that there was a womb involved in creation. That's a story for another time. But it's the position of the Creator's finger which suggests initiation, but it's that gap, that space of potential between the instigating finger of the Creator and Adam, who represents universal man, which explains a lot. And it suggests to me that in order for connection back to source, which is what higher purpose of existence, self-realization is all about, it takes an act of volition on the part of man. And because we've got free will, there's no guarantee that this journey is going to be successful. So volition is well expressed in this very famous quote from the first Star Wars movie. You know, when Luke was doing his training with Yoda and he was trying to lift a vehicle out of the lake, and it'd come and drop down, and it'd come and drop down. You say, I'm trying. And Yoda said, you do or do not. There is no try. You know, and that's really stayed with me. And I thought, yeah, it's true. You do or you do not. There's no in between here. And just as an aside, I think it's really interesting in this movie that Luke's surname was Skywalker, because a Skywalker is someone who has accessed the realm of the gods, that is, having achieved his highest purpose. So if you're able to do the work, you're going to get the reward. That's what Lucas was telling us there, I think. So let's have a little bit more at this lifting a finger. So it's all to do with not trying or giving up. And this is the predominant mindset of the uncompensated lac humanum. The etiology for this state is due to lack of breastfeeding, and rates have really dropped universally. So it is a big problem. And these are the kind of rubrics that are going to be apparent, you know, when you take the case of someone who's in an uncompensated lac humanum state. This is what you're going to be faced with. This is somebody who can't be bothered to lift a finger. I don't know whether it's in your culture, but that's a common phrase here. You can't be bothered to lift a finger. It means that you're lazy, that you won't do what you need to do. So these rubrics kind of sum that up. It's a very dismal picture, very dismal. People are cut off from life. They don't think there's much hope. But so we're talking about DNA here, and in my opinion, this whole idea of creator and source is expressed in DNA. And so this is very important that we understand this. And we do know from research that there's actually a special gene that we all have, and it's called the God gene. It opens up an individual to spirituality and the ability to connect to source or fulfill our highest purpose. And this is called the VMAT2 gene. So its full title is Vesicular Monoamine Transporter number 2. And we know from research that oxytocin supports this gene. So physiologic conception increases the protein levels of it because it occurs in an oxytocic milieu. So this goes back to the observation that the Taupas has made. You've got to have a lot of oxytocin in the mix, at the moment of conception. And that's not happening in a petri dish. 1 in 18 here in Australia. So how did we acquire genes which connect us to source? So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, why do humans have 46 chromosomes and other primates have 48? What happened? Well, scientists have discovered that somewhere along our timeline, chromosome number 2, which contains 3 alleles in chimps and apes, it split and it fused telomere to telomere, rendering a single large chromosome, which constitutes 8% of our DNA. It's the largest chromosome, and it's actually present in every cell. And this is the chromosome which enables higher order thinking and logic. This is what makes the difference. So that research is there if you want to go and have a look in it. So that begs the question, did we evolve or were we created? Now, Greg Braden, he's a physicist who's, written a lot in the spiritual realm, and this book, The God Code, I would recommend to you. He says that the periodic table numbers of the atomic mass of the basic elements, which constitute our makeup, so that's hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon, he says when they are deciphered according to the ancient alphabets, now all of these are assigned a numerical value to each letter, he says that the beginning of each strand of DNA contains a message. And that message is God eternal within the body. And the gematria for this phrase is 2. And 2 is a major theme in Lacumanum, and it's the breast which completes the work begun by the placenta. So we have 2 organs involved in getting this start to life bedded down, if you like. So physiologic conception and physiologic nurture are really important. But the conception particularly so, because the VMAT2 gene, which I referred to before, actually can be deleted in the lab using CRISPR technology during IVF. So we know from research that if this VMAT2 gene is damaged, it can result in increases in a range of mental issues. We can have lowered intellectual capacity, anxiety, or go right to the other end of schizophrenia. It's involved with Parkinson's and cerebral palsy, type 1 diabetes, autoimmune syndromes, cardiac arrhythmias, and cancer. So what is CRISPR technology? It's a system found in some bacteria. It stands for clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats. And scientists have adapted this system along with a special protein called Cas9, and they cut and edit DNA in desired spots. But this bit of research that came out recently in Nature Genetics said that the use of the CRISPR-Cas9 gene scissors causes unintended genetic changes, which are different from random mutations. So this is a big worry. So putting that aside, when we look at conception, it really is quite a sacred event. This is why, the talkers can make a claim like he did. We make this strong, deep connection, and then we get the first cell division here. This forms a vesica Pisces. Vesica Pisces is a very, very powerful state, if you like, of creation, creative ability, especially it stands for, the female ability to create. And that at every conception you go 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64. So every time we're doubling up, the conceptus is actually mimicking all the Platonic solids, which are in sacred geometry. And then we end up with this flower of life pattern. In medicine, we call it the marula, which is Latin for mulberry. And interestingly, mulberry is a word which is in the Christian Bible, and it's connected to initiation. King David slept under the mulberry bush the night before he was anointed king. So we talk about, creation and sovereignty, and we're sovereign beings. And this little cluster of cells rolls down the fallopian tube till it gets to the fundus. Then it elongates, turns itself inside out, and becomes a torus. A torus is where energy translates into matter. And then it becomes a zygote. And the first thing to develop is the heart. So this is all quite profound. And when it's in an oxytocic milieu, it is supported on every level so that the fundamentals and the foundation are really cemented in. But at the other end, we've got technology. Now, this company is a real company, Ectolife. You can look it up. It's in Europe. It's waiting for ethics approval. And I hope it never get it. But I mean, what they're saying is that they can create a baby to your design in the petri dish. They can add in DNA. They can remove DNA. Then they can grow it in these pods, then hand it over to the birthing person who doesn't have a uterus. And of course, there'll be no oxytocin receptors. And of course, there will be no breastfeeding because there wasn't a pregnancy. So these babies are definitely going to be on the spectrum. Yeah. So, what does that say about society and the ability to achieve the high purpose of existence? It's not even going to get off round one. So this is what, real conception looks like. It's a race to the egg. So we found recent research has shown that there is actually a bacteria in the vagina that can interfere with this race. It's called Lactobacillus inus. So, this is why we need motile abundant sperm so that it can get through this first gate. So we need a lot of arginine in the diet. So if you're dealing with people who have got low sperm numbers, you need to increase that. Nuts and seeds are a good source of arginine and also a good source of zinc, which I talked about before. And there's some research there, you can look it up. But this then kind of sums up, one of the bigger catastrophes, and that's the role that microplastics are playing in this space. We're now using this term sperm apocalypse. Is there a solution? Because male fertility is declining 50% in the last 50 years. And what we've done in that time is we've shifted from saturated to polyunsaturated fats, and these are reducing sperm quality and testosterone levels because they're, prone to oxidative stress, and this damages the sperm. And of course, you get the epigenetic disturbances and miscarriages if the sperm is damaged. So just making some simple dietary changes. We need to get back to dripping pots and using ghee so that this can improve the reproductive health of males. So what else is causing sperm numbers to drop? Well, the polyethylene in the microplastics is doing it. So this is affecting the mitochondrial dysfunction because you're getting an overexpression of pro-inflammatory cytokines in the testes. Other reproductive issues are observed with this. Testosterone levels are dropping, and this is because of the estrogenic effect of plastics. And they've looked at this in animal studies, and they know that it causes feminization. And the extent to which this is an issue for humans, we don't know because it's not been studied. Interestingly, this little French study, which was published last year in June, this is people working in IVF, found that 55% of sperm samples in their infertility clinics contain glyphosate. Well, it's not just about plastics, it's looking at weed killers and other things, pesticides. So we'll look at that too in a minute. But the phthalates in plastics, are the big thing, and they're causing huge numbers of sperm to drop. So I would say, to my patients, and I would recommend that you do too, store your food in glass or stainless steel. Try and avoid plastic. Filter your tap water. Wear natural fibers. Have a sustainable lifestyle. All these things help. And then, of course, we've got this to contend with. I just thought I'd slip this in because this is a slide of a post-mortem of testicular fluid in a young man. He was 28. He had the AstraZeneca, then he had the Comirnaty for his second COVID shot, and he was dead in 4 months. And his testes had no sperm in them. They had only spike protein. So this is a problem. And we're not kind of sure. This is a watch this space. Species is, I think, almost at a tipping point if we don't put a halt to this. So this whole thing about microplastics is insidious. So there was a report in 2022 saying that they've now found it in human blood. And in animal test models, they said it can accumulate in the ovaries. These had reduced weight, decreased expression of cytoskeletal proteins, and it really affected the growth and maturation of the follicles in the ovaries. So this is in animal studies. There was another study in a peer-reviewed journal called Nanomaterials, and microplastics now, they know, pass through the placenta. So livers, kidneys, hearts, lungs, and brains of the fetuses. Again, this is in animal studies. So we're now knowing also that it can affect humans. So there was a study done at the University of New Mexico, and they're saying that microplastics are now in brain tissue, and the concentrations in the brain are far exceeding those in other organs. So they investigated samples from the frontal cortex scattered between 2016 and 24, and they found a 50% increase in brain microplastics over the past 8 years. So these are in autopsies, they did this study. So they used chemical processes, they isolated the plastics, and he said that there were 12 types, particularly polyethylene. And they found a lot of it was in the frontal cortex, and so they're wondering if this has got something to do with dementia on the rise. So we did look at animal studies, but there is some concern now about human placentas and cord blood. There was a small study done, and they found 287 chemicals in cord blood. And in Hawaii, they've been looking at placentas since 2006. And what they found is that back in 2006, 60% of placentas had microplastics. By 2013, that had risen to 90%. And by 2021, every placenta was tainted with plastic. So that's the research there if you want to look at it. So there are other things apart from plastics, and that they're chemicals. So this is a study that looked at 199 different chemicals, a range of them there, and they found 57 of them impacted the reproductive system, particularly the bisphenol A, which are in your plastic water bottles, other plastic products, including Band-Aids. They're actually more toxic than the originals. And they're finding that these are really impacting on reproductive outcomes. Also, too, phthalates are in medications, and there's a study came out in 2022. When these are given to children, they raise the likelihood of childhood cancer, 20% increased risk, particularly of osteosarcoma and lymphoma. So this is a big worry. Also, too, they're finding that there is a connection with stillbirth. So they looked at this, it was a longer-ranging study done in Arizona from 2006 to 2020. So they looked at mothers living within 500 metres of any pyrethroid organophosphate or carbamate insecticide applications before, during pregnancy, and they linked them to stillbirth. So they actually looked at over 1 million births, and 2,290 were linked to 27 different pesticides. So stillbirth occurs about 4 to 5 in 1,000 births. But when you've got this kind of situation, it's on the rise. And we've got a problem here in Australia. This data came out last year. I mean, traditionally, we've had 3 in 1,000 neonatal deaths. But now, look at this. This is where I live. 12.3 babies in every 1,000 are dying, either born dead or die soon afterwards. This is a really, really dire situation. And of course, there was a little bit of hue and cry about it. And so they looked into it and they found, surprise, surprise, if you've got a high BMA, you're a teenager, you come from a poor socioeconomic condition, or you're a First Nations person, this is what's going to happen to you. And so what the Queensland government's doing is saying, oh, well, we'll spend $3 million and make access to neonatal scans more available, because if we do that and we educate you and you know that scans can save lives, we'll fix this problem. They're not looking at the elephant in the room. And this is it here. So this protein, syntysin 1, which governs the health of the placenta, was associated with neonatal death in 2020. Look how high up it went. Huge. And this is because they were recommending that women got the COVID vaccine in the first trimester of pregnancy. And as soon as they realised, I went, oops, we need to put it now in the third trimester of pregnancy. And so the numbers began to drop. But you would have seen these in your clinic. Women with placentas that were the colour of a manila folder and just full of clots. Yeah. So syntysin 1 is involved with placental development. And then, of course, the embryo attaches to the placenta, and that's where it gets its nutrients from. And what they found is that patients who died from COVID, and they looked at the histopathology of their lungs, there were atypical cells with 2 to 20 nuclei. And apparently in COVID-affected individuals, clotting occurs in the presence of high ACE2s in the endothelium of the blood vessels, causes infection, internal injury inside the vascular walls. So this directly or indirectly may initiate coagulation, clotting cascades forming internal blood clots. And, the clotting is one of the big things that was reported early on and is associated with this situation with babies, and resulted in AstraZeneca pulling their vaccine. So we definitely know that placentas are being affected. And this is another interesting study that came out last year, at the beginning of the year. It was just 2 women when they were looking at cord blood. Patient 1 received her Pfizer shots, 1 Pfizer, 1 Moderna. Last shot was administered 2 days before she had a C-section. Then they collected samples from her placenta and cord blood. And then the other one had 2 Pfizer shots 10 days before a vaginal delivery. So they undergot placental samples. And so what they found was in both of them, they had MRNA, okay, spike protein found in the placenta and found in the cord and maternal blood. So this is a worry. And of course, SIDS is really on the rise. And so this study came out last year from JAMA, and they found that SIDS increased during the COVID pandemic, more than pre-pandemic period. And what they're saying is that it's being linked to the rise in RSV. So that's a kind of interesting observation, because if babies are breastfed, they're not at risk for RSV. So probably the inoculation is making it more susceptible. So we might have to have a look at that. This is an interesting little report that came out last year. This is a little hospital in Edmonton, has a little internal newsletter, and they put in a little article saying that 50% increased rate of stillbirth in their young women, and doctors are baffled. They didn't know what was causing it. This other data that came out was European. They looked at countries which had high rates of vaccination and their birth rate decreased. And then they looked at the 5 most vaccinated and they had even a bigger decrease. So they said, look, we're going to have less than 1 million babies, which is our normal number in 2024. So it'll be interesting to see what the data says. It will come out soon. So between 20 and 22, SIDS rate in America went up by 11%. And also maternal deaths have gone right up. So, gone from 9.65 up to 32.9. That's not progress in obstetric care. So something's going on where women, and I'm getting anecdotal reports from midwives saying that it's hemorrhage and that, they're describing labour ward as a bloodbath. Women are really suffering. And very interestingly, in November last year, in the British Medical Journal, just this letter popped up. Nothing much was said, no hoopla, but the Vaccine Advisory Committee in Britain isn't going to recommend that women have a COVID shot anymore. Okay? They presented evidence that there's a low risk to pregnant women and their infants, and that the vaccine gave minimal benefit. So they said, because of this, they're not going to recommend it. Didn't have a look at the safety concerns at all. They're just looking at, the hospitalisation rate and the cost. But that's good. That's a win. And this just came out 2 weeks ago. It's a Chinese study. And what they found is that the vaccine can cause rapid placental transfer within 1 hour. This is in a mouse model. It'll accumulate in the organs, persisting beyond clearance from maternal circulation. It translates into spike protein in the fetus, so they're going to have long-term immune responses. And there's persistence of fetal liver and spleen RMA for at least 3 weeks postnatally. So, we don't know what the long-term consequences of this is going to be for humans. So we're talking about a healthy instrument so that we can really do the work to be self-realised, and we are really up against it now. But then, of course, it's even more worrisome is that the simian virus, SV40, which got bad press a long time ago, because, vaccines used to be run up on beef tissue, bovine tissue, until mad cow disease became a problem. Then they started doing it on simian kidney cells, and that became a problem because of cancer. And now they're doing it on human embryonic kidney cells, which, of course, again, is another problem. And when babies get a vaccine on day one in the first weeks, run up on kidney cells from maybe the opposite sex, has this got anything to do with gender dysphoria? We don't know. But this study done in Germany says that the rate for this virus is set at 10 nanograms a dose. And what they're finding in the COVID vaccines, it's ranging from 360 to 534 times higher than internationally accepted limits. And what they're saying is that this means that the RNA COVID vaccine has the ability to alter the human genome. And that's quite serious. Now, the latest from the CDC, they've said, well, okay, hospitalisation and death from COVID is diminishing, but they've just in this past week doubled down, saying that babies should be getting the COVID shots. And they just said this is because they looked at 137,000 babies. And they said that getting the boosters lowered the risk of hospitalisation by 33%. But of course, if babies have died from SIDS, they're not going to be in hospital. So, this is really cherry-picking data. Interestingly, parents are not vaccinating their children very much anymore. It's just dropped right off. Although I just saw a report yesterday saying that with all the measles outbreaks in America at the moment, they're really rushing to get measles vaccines again. So endocrine disruptors, interrupt growth, development, reproduction, and metabolism. And this study in Brazil said that this can affect the thyroid. And we know that the thyroid is important for pregnancy and lactogenesis. So that's the study there if you want to have a look at it. And also this Chinese study said that mothers who had exposure to chemicals had children with a higher risk of obesity, especially 10-year-olds. And this was more likely to happen if they were exposed very early on before they were 2. And that's because these toxins are stored in body fat. So the PFAs have a unique ability to cross the blood-brain barrier. So, how does this affect gene expression? How does it affect cell membrane lipids? So they have looked at it, especially the ones that are on the non-stick pans, because these are quite hazardous, and they found that these are the most impactful. They decreased expression of genes involved in synaptic growth and neural function. So again, this is a problem that we need to be addressing in society. I think, having a stainless steel wok for your cooking is the way to go. ADHD is also linked to early childhood exposure to chemicals, and there was a study in Environmental International about that, especially if this exposure occurred early on. It was a Chinese study, and if, by the time you were 2, you had the exposure, by the time you were 10, you were going to be ADHD. So that's the study there. Now, banning pesticides and other chemicals is probably going to happen in America now, since RFK Jr. has taken over his role, because Europe, have really been on the ball for a long time. But in America, they've not been, in step, and still using these pesticides, on their crops. And Dactyl is linked to changes in fetal thyroid hormone, leading to serious health issues, including low birth weight, impaired brain development, lower IQ, and motor skill problems. And they did a peer-reviewed study in 2022, and they said that Dactyl was the main, nigger in the woodpile, if you like. It's causing such trouble. So you got to wash your vegetables, maybe peel your vegetables, try and minimize the exposure you get to this pesticide. So just recently in December, there was another pesticide in America called chlorovirus, which is also known to be harmful to babies. It was up for being banned, but there was a pushback from the agricultural lobby. So they've allowed it to be used in 11 crops, and that's them there. And this is even though they know that it causes neurodevelopmental effects in children. So that's a bit of a worry. But hopefully these sorts of things will become less prevalent now. Early this year, the EPA is considering allowing concentrations of this herbicide, atrazine, which is a known endocrine disruptor, to be allowed at 9.7 parts per billion in streams, lakes, before you have to worry about it. That's the worry. So this is a weed killer. Farmers use it, particularly those who grow corn, and it contaminates the drinking water. So this raises concerns for human health. And it can affect the sexual development of frogs. It will cause castration in frogs, feminizing of male frogs. And Europeans have banned it since 2003. It's still being used in America. So interestingly, last month, the New England Journal of Medicine came out with this, they're saying manufactured chemicals are affecting children's health and we need new legislation. And they're saying that all these chronic diseases that children are presenting with now, you can link them right back to chemicals. These are neurodevelopmental disorders, reproductive defects, obesity, asthma, autism, all of that. And this was 25 scientists, they're economists, they're legal scholars. He said, we've got to really look at this and put a stop to it. Okay, so putting that aside, let's have a look at the way babies are born. Is that important? Well, yes, it's important, because the feedback loop of the Ferguson reflex has a role to play in priming oxytocin receptors. And we know that if there's any trauma around birth, it's got long-term ramifications associated with self-harm and suicide, which come into the orbit of lac maternum, lac humanum, and lac defloratum. Now, these two studies were done by Scandinavians, one in 87 and one in 98, same team. They looked at adult self-destructive behavior linked back to, trauma at birth. And they also looked at the proneness to suicide linked to trauma in birth. And, lac maternum is one of our biggest remedies for suicidal ideation stemming from this. So I'm just going to share a little bit of a case that I took a long time ago, early on, not long after I did the proving, and it taught me a lot about lac maternum. So this young lady, Menaki at 14, she was sexually active by the time she was 17. She went to uni at 18 and she discovered marijuana. She said she had one bad trip where she left her body and she astral traveled. She lost a sense of herself and a barrier between herself and the world. And she said, I didn't fully come back. And so since then, she's been psychic. And see, that's one of the main things that you'll find in lac maternum is this feeling of not being in your body. And for that reason, I've used it for people who are affected by shedding, when they say that they feel that they've been knocked sideways. Lac maternum has brought them back in. And I did a webinar on that, and it's on my website. It would have been back in 2021, probably, if you want to go and look at it. So this lass was a regular marijuana user. She said, it calms me down. She says, I can't go without it. Has it several times a week. So she's got ongoing depression. She was committed to hospital with psychotic episodes. She was kept in for 4 weeks, and they're trying to make her give up her drugs, and she's been put on Zoloft. Then she was under the care of a caseworker. But she's gained weight because she's eating comfort food, which is a lac humanum thing. So she's wanting creamy things, you know, lots of cheese, lots of milk. So she did 2 years of arts, unhappy, so she went to do environmental science and she dropped that, went to Melbourne to make a living with her music. She says playing the cello calms her. She sings jazz and she's got a good voice, but no training. But then she came back to Brisbane, was living in a squat and into lots of one-night stands and lots of marijuana. So what's happening here is that you're looking for that oxytocin hit. That's what the one-night stands is about. She gets to a stage where she said, all I wanted was a clean bed, clean PJs, and a safe place to curl up and rest. That desire, like the baby that's just been born, has its first breastfeed, and then just curls up and sleeps, cuts off. So she said, I went home to my parents, but they put me in hospital. Then she came out and went to stay with her grandmother, and she's just returned and she wants to make a go of it with her music. And I did treat her on and off for several years, but it was of no use, and she kept going back to the drugs. So that imprinting of the drugs is very, very insidious. And the thing about it is that in birth now, we're getting so many drugs used with, mothers having antibiotics before birth, mothers having inductions, mothers having cesareans, medication post-birth. And so the junctions between the milk cells are open during that time. So any medication that the mother's had will go through the bloodstream and straight into the breast and straight into the baby. So if that happens in those early days, the imprinting is there, and that is a form of birth trauma. And so that when they come to drugs again, when they're older, they get lost. She has flying dreams. She says, I just so don't want to be on Earth. So she's looking in different houses. The dreams of houses is one of the keynotes for lac maternal because the house is the mansion of the soul. She has a recurring dream of being in a high school, trying to do her studies, but not doing it correctly. That's very common in lac maternum and lac humanum. It's because it's to do with karma. You've got to come back and get it right again, okay? The school of hard knocks. She can have dreams about previous lovers. And she says, I'm most afraid of not fulfilling my potential. She said, I'm here to learn, but I also want to contribute. She said, I want to find a nice bloke, settle down, with reasonable income that will allow us a measure of independence. So she's had that glimmer of what's possible, but it's got beyond her. So let's look at birth. So at the situation just at the end, the baby's got to negotiate this area here, which is full of bacteria, and that's important because it is all to do with establishing the microbiome. So in the last weeks of the pregnancy, the baby's ingesting vernix, and this creates a specific niche in the baby's intestines for the branched chain fatty acids. And so you're looking at bifidobacterium, bacteroids, and propionbacterium. And the oral mucosa then is further seeded when they move down the birth canal. They arrive on the perineum, and so they've got both vaginal and fecal bacteria there. And then they go up onto the mother's skin immediately after birth. And so all the household bacteria gets infiltrated onto the baby, and that's important. Because 70 to 80% of our immune cells are in our gut. So this start to life really matters. Now, how common is this these days? Not as common as it used to be. Certainly not as common as it was in Hahnemann's time. So, it's nature's intent that, we're going to be, with a vaginal birth, you're going to have these strains of bacteria predominating. If you're going to have a Caesar, you're going to have different bacteria predominating. And these are going to be Staphylococcus, Corynebacterium, Propionibacterium, or even the pathogenic ones like Klebsiella, Enterococcus, and Clostridium. So it's a whole different mix when there's a Caesar birth than there is when there's a vaginal birth. And this is quite important for us to consider. And in some birthing rooms now, they are actually taking perineal secretions, vaginal secretions, and putting them in the baby's mouth and nose to try and infiltrate and mimic, what should have happened if they had come down the birth canal. So the first person to handle the baby should be the mother, and the baby comes up onto her chest, as I said, and is infiltrated with the skin. And it's good to keep the cord still intact till it stops pulsating, so that the baby can get enough red blood cells to tide them through, to help them build antibodies, get stem cells, white blood cells. All that sort of thing is really important in those first minutes after birth. So, there's a recent study, it's down there, it came out in January this year. It says that breast milk plays a significant role for microbiota transfer and has a theoretical basis for promoting gut health. It's a key source of breast milk microbiota. Now, that's interesting because you kind of think of breast milk as something that's sterile, but actually it's got a lot of microbes in it. And we think that they're there to seed the microbiome. And E. coli is in breast milk. So, you need E. coli to manufacture vitamin K. I mean, colostrum's high in vitamin K. And so by the end of, that first week, when the true milk has come in and you've got E. coli there, you've got some vitamin K, continuing to be built. And that's when little David or little Levi can go off to the rabbi to have his circumcision and not have a hemorrhage, because, you're going to have some clotting happening. So, all this stuff that happens in those early hours and days is very important. So the other thing too with this is that in breast milk, you've got over 200 special sugars. They're called oligosaccharides, and they're not there in any other milk. And what they do is just provide food for the gut flora, okay? So what happens is that they break down dietary fibers and they produce short-chain fatty acids, particularly butyrate, and this fuels colonic epithelial cells, and it strengthens the intestinal barrier, stimulates mucin production, which forms a protective layer against harmful bacteria. And when you've got a lot of mucin, you're going to get to levels of Akkermansia are going to be coming up. Now, this is a bacteria that's anaerobic, grows in the absence of oxytocin. It's in the gut right from the get-go because of breast milk and what it produces. And you need about 3 to 5% of Akkermansia in the gut. And this stops you from having what's called leaky gut. So you get tight junctions, okay? So it's got an anti-inflammatory effect. So it improves insulin sensitivity, liver function, has a role to play in appetite regulation and cognitive function. So really important, for the baby to go to the breast from the get-go and being able to get these bacteria in the gut, established, and that, helps prevent aggravation from various toxins, harmful microbes that will come into the bloodstream, particularly those that trigger inflammation, chronic illness. And of course, they're getting vaccines right from the get-go now. So you need to have tight junctions so that they minimize the problems that you're going to get from that. Another little interesting study has shown that children who have early bedtimes are going to have higher levels of Akkermansia because it is promoted through fasting. And so if you go to bed early and have a good long night's sleep, it's going to improve the Akkermansia. And so babies who are very fractious and who have nibbling appetite, you know, your nat carb babies who want to go to the breast all the time. They seem to be suck, 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 suck. That's because they're in pain and they want that peristalsis. It's like an internal itch. But if you can fast those babies and put them on a strict 3-hour or 4-hour schedule of feeding and give them both breasts, fill them up, make sure the mother's diet's high in fat and they're satisfied, their akkermansia will come up. And that's important. The other thing too is that they're finding kids with lower levels of akkermansia are more likely to be on the spectrum. So there's another bacteria too that's called Ruminococcus narvis that only starts to show its head when you're weaning. So, you know, if that happens, the research has shown that it can be involved in the breakdown of tryptophan. So tryptophan and its metabolites are linked to immune system regulation, and the prevalence of the microbe can lead to an increase of asthma and also inflammatory bowel disease and other neurological disorders. So if you're breastfeeding, the Ruminococcus granulis is you keep a lid on it. And so the longer you breastfeed, the better. WHO says 6 months, 2 years is ideal. Anthropologists say 4 years. So, you know, whatever mother and baby can manage, you know, it is excellent. So then we have the miasm. So you ever wondered why Hahnemann only nominated 3 miasms? Well, I think it's because we've got 3 metabolic pathways. So SORA governs homeostasis, and its epigenetic driver is oxytocin. Psychosis governs anabolism, and its epigenetic drivers are the corticosteroid hormones. And Aloysius governs catabolism, and its epigenetic driver is insulin. And I have published on that in links. If you've got links, or you can look at it on my website, it's freely available. So how does SORA affect the constitution? Well, we were talking about the healthy instrument, a robust constitution, okay? This thing about lack is not part of the conversation if you've got a robust constitution. So that means your metabolic pathway of homeostasis just hums along, keeps you resilient. Why is this important? Because SORA is the engenderer of all dis-ease, okay? If SORA is set low rather than high and strong, you're going to be more unbalanced. And this pathway is driven by oxytocin. So oxytocin will set to right any metabolic disturbance with the potential to lead to pathology and is a natural antagonist to the corticosteroid hormones. So you get functional disorder will not lead to pathological change if oxytocin is high. So it keeps the constitution robust, you know, keeps us there in the running that aphorism number 9 is maybe going to be achievable. If that oxytocic pathway is strong, we've got a better chance. So we'll have a quick look at oxytocin. Well, it's a hormone. It's a neurotransmitter. It has a paracrine effect on the body. That is, it's very pervasive. It regulates the autonomic nervous system. Now, this controls internal organs, other key body functions. So that does this by increasing the PNS branch of the ANS, which slows the heart, reduces blood pressure, energy expenditure, and promotes rest, digestion, affiliation. So it chills you out. You know, you get this calm and connection effect. And it promotes social interaction. Okay. For people on the spectrum, this is what they struggle with, social interaction. I skipped a slide there. So we've got a rise in technology now around reproduction. That's a fact. Okay. But what research has shown is that if the breastfeeding can be achieved and extensive, the estrogens in the milk induce both the transcription of oxytocin and its receptors, and that means that breastfeeding upregulates oxytocin. Okay, so if you have to have, you know, the technology around the reproduction and the birth, if the breastfeeding goes well, it can help to make up for that. So that's really important to keep that in mind, and for us to really focus with mothers when they come in and they've got breastfeeding problems, to get it sorted. And let me say, I am very open to anybody shooting me an email with a quick question saying, I've got this case, da, 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 da. Can you make some suggestions? There is a lot of information on my website. I did a whole year of webinars in 2023 about all the common kind of problems that you'll find in breastfeeding. They're freely available. You can get your mothers to have a look at them, or you look at them yourself. So most, ways out of the problem are there, but I'm happy to be a backup, because to save a lactation is one step forward for humanity as far as I'm concerned. So, society in general has this attitude that, well, milk's milk, but it's not. The thing is, milk is species specific. All mammals have their own milk, and it's special for their babies, to make their babies, cope, survive, flourish. I mean, human milk, and I'll put the orangutan there. These are all the ones that we've got provings for. So, when you look at the orangutan, which is not proven, I just put it in there because they're our DNA cousins, but our protein is very low. Our lactose is very high. And the most common, milk substitute in formula is the cow. Really high amounts of protein. I mean, calves grow to be very big very quickly, and only half the lactose. So cows are dumb animals. I mean, the milk that's most like human milk is the milk of the donkey. Yeah, look at that, high lactose, not such high protein. Trouble is, there's a lot of barium in As's milk, which makes it not suitable. But let's, look at this when I talk about species specificity. Look at the kangaroo. It's got less than 10% solids, which means that 90% of that milk is water. We live in a dry climate. That's why, it's adapted to that. Look down here at the seal and the whale. Look at the amount of solids they've got. Look at the amount of fat, particularly in the seal, because baby seals are left on rookeries. They're there often for days while their mother goes off to get fed herself. Then she comes back and she feeds her baby. He has good feed of her high-fat milk, and off she goes again. So, it's a very individual thing, and there is no substitute for human milk, really, for a million reasons, which I'll go into. So I mentioned the lactose. So there's a lot of studies that have come out about, brain development in human milk. And I'm going to share this one with you. It was a Brazilian study that was begun in 1982, and they published it 30 years later. Okay, that's a long time. They followed these thousands of babies. And so babies who were breastfed for 12 months or more had higher IQ, more years of education, higher monthly incomes. And this is all because they were breastfed extensively, and the brain had the benefit of that. So when you look at lac humanum in the cognition group, well, all the lacs really have got 4 cognition rubrics. I'll just quickly share the lac humanum ones without kind of dwelling on it too deeply. But if somebody comes in and they're in an uncompensated lac humanum space, this is how they're going to be. They're going to be absent-minded, having trouble concentrating, very confused, poor memory, thoughts are really disconnected. They're very anxious. They don't like people to look at them. They're very sad, melancholic, weary of life. They think, oh my God, life's not worth living. And they really do desire death. And so they will self-harm. They have this delusion that they're worthless, that that someone's accusing them of a crime. They're apprehensive, they're nervous, and they're quite impulsive. And as I said, they will harm themselves. So they're irresolute, they're embarrassed, they're indecisive, they think they're never going to succeed, they hate being examined or tested, they don't like to work, very indifferent, like I showed you before, don't want to lift a finger, bored, brooding, introspective, they're very switched off. They have these terrible delusions that they've got no friends, unwanted, they're friendless, they're alone. I can remember once having a case where a little boy had bad arthritis, and he said, Patricia said, sometimes I think I'm the only kid in the world. It was such a sad thing because no one would play with him in the playground because he had a disability. So, this is the way, the lac humanum space impacts on people, okay? They think that they're worthless individuals, which is really sad. And so interestingly, I just want to quickly share this with you. It's a study that was done here in Queensland. It came out last year, the end of last year. So it was a School of Public Health associated with their Mental Health Research Centre. And they looked at 1,500 international research papers on autism. And they looked at the risk, mortality, burden of suicide of people on the spectrum. So they looked at people who didn't have intellectual disability, and they found that they were 5 times more likely to die by suicide compared to people not on the spectrum. And the risk factors were bullying, social rejection, stigma, and discrimination. The children are lost. They're lost. It's a really sad situation, particularly here in Australia at the moment. Young people are running amok. They're causing violent crime. They're just given up on life. They just don't think there is any future, and it's every man for himself. This is kind of where they're at. But the compensated lac humanum has a good sense of self. They're very in tune with everybody. They can be alone but not lonely. They can do their thing by themselves. They can interact with people, but then not interact with people, and it doesn't bother them. Okay? They're very comfortable. Someone said to me recently, "Oh, I'll put you with so-and-so. I know you'll talk to anybody." Yeah, well, I will. And I mean, all homeopaths are like that, aren't they? I mean, this is what we've got an open disposition to listen. And I think a lot of lac humanums, a lot of practitioners in homeopathy are lac humanums because, we have this empathic kind of ability to help. So, the compensated lac humanum has got an increase in confidence. They're assertive. They dress colourfully. They don't like anything to be untidy. They're quite fastidious. So they like everything to be in order. They really work on themselves, the way they look and, their fitness. They'll move on from the past. They're quite chilled out people, and they've got enormous patience. They're very alert. They can really concentrate and focus on things. They can think of several things at once, very clear thought processes, and they love to do it. They really love to research and to use their brain, but, bring it on. And they want to improve at work. They have ambition, but they have a good, work-life balance. They don't overdo it. They know how to chill out, but when they're on song, they're on song. So what other ways is the mode of nurture during the primal period? Well, so we say milk is the most perfect, nutritionally balanced food for human infants, yeah? It's designed to continue optimal maturation of all of the organs, systems post-birth, and research in developed countries indicates that a lack of it is associated with these morbidities. There they are there. More diarrhea, more respiratory infections, more meningitis, more ear infections, more allergies, increased risk of SIDS, more chronic digestive disorders, more dental orthopedic problems, more diabetes, high cholesterol, more learning development, delayed development and learning difficulties, and preemie babies are more likely to get necrotizing enterocolitis. This is all based on research because they weren't breastfed. So, bottom line is that human milk now isn't being offered for long enough. Yeah? This is the etiology for the lac humanum state, insufficient breastfeeding. So in Australia now, at 6 months, only 14% of mothers are still breastfeeding. Back in my day, 70s and 80s, it was double that. But Canada's the same as us. UK are the worst in the world. Only 1% of mothers at 6 months are still breastfeeding. So I'd be interested to know what it's like in your country. I mean, you can maybe tell me in the Q&A section. USA are really putting a lot of effort in to get their rates up because they have figured out that it impacts, on the GDP of the nation. It translates into real dollars. If you get the breastfeeding rates up, babies are healthier, okay, and they're not a burden. And this is because anthropologists tell us, as I said, primates lactate for 6 times the gestation rate. Yeah? And we don't tend to do that in developed countries. The thing is, we're altricial mammals, yeah, as opposed to precocious mammals. So a precocious mammal is a calf, a giraffe, any of the, the little ones that can soon after birth get up and walk and then come back to the baby quickly. We need to be carried around for a long time before that's possible. Yeah? So we're very dependent on what we get from our mother to finish us off. So that's why, WHO says at least 6 months, by then, baby's starting to produce their own immunoglobulins. That's why you don't, give solid food before 6 months. Yeah. 2 years is considered ideal. But, longer, the better. Human brain doesn't finish development into the 3rd year, along with immune system maturation. Actually, Australia's rates for breastfeeding at 6 months are poor, but we do know that 5% of our mothers are still breastfeeding their babies past the year or 2. So some of them are getting it right, which is good. So this is an interesting image. I mean, UNICEF say that 1.4 million babies die due to lack of breast milk. Yeah, this is based on study. Now, this is an old photograph. It's a Pakistani lady, and she gave permission for lactation consultants to use it. She had twins, a boy and a girl, and her mother-in-law said to her, "You're not going to have enough milk to feed the 2 of them, so you're going to have to choose." And so she chose to feed the boy. And that photograph was taken at 3 months, the day before her little girl died. So when people don't have, enough money for formula and the paraphernalia, they don't have access to clean water or electricity, the breastfeeding becomes even more paramount. I mean, in the West, we've swapped mortality for morbidity, yeah? But either way, it's still a problem. We're talking about being a healthy instrument for the higher purpose of existence. That's all to do with morbidity. And that's huge in the West, yeah? So childhood cancers are on the rise, and we know that breastfeeding has a protective effect, especially against lymphoma. And there was research done on this back in 2004. They thought, well, maybe it's to do with the alpha-lactalbumin, which is the main protein in human milk. Cow's milk's protein is beta-lactoglobulin, that's different. But they did find that there was a complex of the alpha-lactalbumin and oleic acid, okay? And they called it Hamlet, human alpha-lactalbumin made lethal to tumor cells. Yeah. And what it does is it induces apoptosis just in the tumor cells. So normal differentiated cells are resistant to its effect. And so that's why if you can, if a woman comes in and she's Asterias rubens and you get that sorted quickly and you save the lactation, she's probably not going to have cancer down the track. I had a lady pop in the other day in her first pregnancy. That was the situation. I said to her, if you didn't respond, you were going to get referred off. But she did respond, and I helped her get a lactation established. And she's now feeding a second one who's 4 and still having some occasional feeds. But, her breasts now are really healthy because the breast milk flowing through it, is keeping the breast healthy. Yeah. And there are a lot of other benefits for mothers, which we're not going to look at here, but it's not just to do with cancer. So there's antimicrobial activity in the breast. So if a mother has had mumps and measles and chickenpox as a child, it means that, in her milk, she's going to have those antibodies. And human milk is very high in secretory IgA. That's the immunoglobulin that protects mucous membranes. Actually, in breast milk, it's 5 times higher than it is in serum, and it protects against all of those viruses. And I'll put RSV in red because it's the new kid on the block that we need to having a look at. But if a baby is breastfed, it's actually at low risk for RSV. And the thing that's interesting, when AIDS first raised its head, they were saying, you've got to take the babies away from the mothers because they're going to get AIDS. And they found out since that there's a whole bunch of stuff in human milk that's protective against AIDS. So now they're certainly allowing mothers to breastfeed their babies. And we know that there's a very dynamic situation with the breast. I mean, if somebody brings into the household some kind of infection, say the flu or something like that, it registered straight away in the mother. Mother immediately will make antibodies to that because she's exposed to it and delivers them to the baby. If the baby's in childcare and comes home with a cold, the baby will inoculate the breast through the Montgomery's tubercles, and immediately the breast will make antibodies to whatever it is that's often, assailing the baby and help the baby to get better. So you've got this very dynamic situation that you just cannot mimic with formula. Okay, very important to understand that. So COVID and breast milk, well, we can't really have much time to look at that, but there has been a study done by Hannah, came out in 2022, and he said that they found the spike protein in breast milk within 48 hours, actually as early as 1 hour. So, this is a watch this space, and it's a bit of a worry. I can say to you, actually, let me just go back here. Very early on, I would say at the end of 2019, when, we were getting all these horrible things about what was happening with COVID when it was in Asia, there were some anecdotal reports coming out of babies being born to mothers with COVID, having COVID, being tested, but within a few days of being on the breast, their status changed. I went, that's good. That fits with what, human milk will do for viruses. And there was a woman in New York in America. She did a small pilot study, and she looked at the protective effect of breast milk with COVID and found that there was protection, and suggested that we needed to look more of it. But of course, it got swept under the carpet. And so no, don't want to go there. We want to promote the inoculation, and the mothers have gone along with that. But the breast milk is protective, and I am finding, as I said to you, I use lacmaternum for people initially, and then I follow it with lachumanum to reset the innate immune system. And my favorite potency is the Fibonacci potency of lachumanum. So it's got 1, 2, 3, 5, and 8 in it, because human milk is a sarcode, and it promotes receptors. So if you give it quite aggressively, it will help reset the immune system if the inoculation is really affecting it. So that's just my experience. And in active COVID, we're all using lots of different remedies, but this is more for people who have been exposed or have been forced to take the inoculation. That's the first thing that I'll do for them. So, how did this happen that, we got signed off on this? Because the reports that were coming out said that there was disturbing data, right from the get-go, but they kept it hidden. There were 673 case reports, 458 of them involved vaccine exposure in pregnancy, and 215 involved exposure during breastfeeding. This was in the initial study. And of the 458 cases, more than half of them had adverse events. And you can read about that there. So up to 20% of the lactation cases reported adverse events in infants exposed to the vaccine through the transmammary route. That's through breast milk. A lot of adverse events reported in these babies being breastfed: facial paralysis, lymphadenopathy, blurred vision. So, but Naomi Wolf has really looked into this, and you can follow her on her Substack, and she keeps you up to date with what's going on there. But this is an unfolding situation. I mean, we're just a few years down the track, and we don't know what the long-term implications are for babies who have been breastfed through this time, with being exposed to the spike protein, especially in mothers who continue to take boosters. So, why is this a problem? We've just got a virus, or do we have a virus? I mean, this showed up on my desk way back in 2021. It was in PubMed. So this researcher was looking at the spike protein, thinking, what is it that's in it that, we can use to develop a vaccine? And this is what he found, all of this. And I looked at that and I thought, no wonder hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin were efficacious, banned. No wonder we never found a genus epidemicus. No wonder every time somebody comes into our clinic with COVID, we use lots of different remedies and we have to change them because the vital force is having to deal with this mix. And apparently there are over 100 pathogens in the Moderna patent. That's huge. And so what we're finding now from other research that's coming out, this one from Argentina, found that in all of these vaccines, there are 11 heavy metals and 11 of the 15 lanthanides, all used as excipients. All toxic, all toxic. Now, this just came out recently, the 18th of February, Yale University. They've now uncovered a serious condition linked to the inoculations. It's called post-vaccination syndrome, or PVS. They found that vaccinated individuals are experiencing brain fog, dizziness, tinnitus, extreme fatigue, and the symptoms are strikingly similar to long COVID. It also showed persistent spike protein in the blood for up to 2 years post-vaccination, suggesting there's going to be long-term immune damage. The findings also reveal that the vaccines appear to reactivate Epstein-Barr, which is, linked to flu-like symptoms, nerve issues, and swollen lymph nodes. And patients with this had an immune response which was abnormal. So they have lower levels of CD4 or helper T cells and exhausted CD8 killer T cells. And I have seen other research that says that there's increased of IgG4, which is the kind of immunoglobulin you get with anaphylaxis. So, there's a lot we're still learning, and certainly, we're talking about having a healthy body for the high purpose of existence. And now that we're dealing with this, it's becoming even more and more difficult. So this is it's an in-your-face thing, but it just shows you very quickly a couple of neurological, but these are mostly all cardiovascular increases that have come out from the vaccine. We're looking at 99 million individuals to get these results. And these two biggies here are the myocarditis and the pericarditis. And you probably are all treating this in your clinics. So I might just take a little sideways step here and just talk for a few minutes about vaccination. I mean, the term comes from the Latin word vacca, meaning cow. It's something that you introduce into the body for the purpose of introducing immunity. And that's one of the reasons why I've used lac maternum, in the case of shedding, because in the proving, there was a dream of being followed or pursued by a cow. There was also a dream about a vampire, and a vampire is about the poison fang, the blood that's not clean, dead, undead situation. And I thought, yes, this is going to be a remedy that we're going to need for vaccination for sure. And when the rollout occurred, there was a report on CNN with an interviewer talking to a doctor about how people were reacting to the early vaccines. And the reporter said, some people are saying that they're seeing aliens. And I went, what? That's one of the keynote rubrics that came up in lac maternum, out of your body. And I went, right, I'm going to look into this more closely. And so we're talking here definition. So you've got vacca from the cow, vaccination. Immunization is about becoming immune. And it also comes from the Latin. Immunitatis, meaning freedom or immunity. Immunis in the adjective, freedom or exempt from tribute or taxation. So when you talk about immunity, you're saying that if you engage with a disease, you pay your tax and then immunity is conferred. Okay? That's what immunization is. And so when people say they've been immunized, I say, no, 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 you've been vaccinated. And I really push that term because of that. I mean, the gaslighting around the vaccines has been going on ever since Jenner's time. I mean, they keep changing the definitions. So originally it was putting in a killed or weakened infectious organism to prevent the disease. Then it changed to you introduce a vaccine to produce immunity. So that means because they're testing and looking for antibodies, which are short term. And then with COVID, they're saying, we're giving it to you to protect you from a specific disease. I mean, when you go back to the 1700s, which is when Jenner was doing his stuff, I mean, the doctors, the medical profession knew that what he was doing was crazy, that it had no substance in medicine because they understood that there was an innate immune system. They'd observed that. And this business of there being cowpox and that the milkmaids who, got cowpox didn't get smallpox was a misnomer because the medical profession knew that that was all just a matter of those women had syphilis and were giving the syphilis to the cows. And that's why they were getting the ulcers on the udders. It had nothing to do with any kind of disease called cowpox. Smallpox was about bed bugs. It was spread by bed bugs. And it disappeared once the washing machine was invented in the early 1900s. It had nothing to do with vaccination. So anyway, we haven't got time to go into that, but, we've been gaslit right from the get-go, over 300 years of it. Yeah, and it's hard to turn that around. But if you can just do little things like saying, no, this is not immunization, it is vaccination, and explain the historical context. Because this is what babies are dealing with now. I know this is a very confronting meme. I mean, it's huge what's on the agenda now. I had my babies in the 70s and 80s, and this is all that was on offer back then. Yeah. And if I'd known then what I know now, they wouldn't have had any of their shots. But my babies were breastfed a long time, so, and they are robust. But now, look at what's on offer, and that includes these, which have not actually been approved yet. Yeah. This is huge. And then you've got pregnancy vaccines. And I can remember when I was pregnant with my first baby in 1975, and the flu vaccine was just coming onto the market. And I said to because I was a teacher, a high school teacher, and I used to get the flu, in winter. I said, should I have a vaccine? Oh, no, you're pregnant. And I think how things have changed, because now, look, this is all that's on offer now. And pregnant women are expected to get all of these, and they are rolling them up. And the latest Hep B vaccine says it's not recommended in pregnancy due to lack of safety data in pregnant persons. I mean, the risk of newborn babies, getting Hep B is very low unless you're doing needles. It's not a high risk. It's just a theoretical risk. This should not be happening. So we know now, research is coming out, that when you put a lot of vaccines together and they're all getting these, mixed shots now, you're going to get, more adverse outcomes. And particularly respiratory illness, so bronchiolitis and RSV. So the more vaccines an infant receives at once, the greater the chance they're going to end up in trouble. And that's apart from developmental delays, which is why they say vaccines cause autism. So the latest data on SIDS in America rose by 11%. Latest saying that it's the third leading cause of infant death in the first year. Diseases of the blood, respiratory system are also in the top 10 causes. Bacterial sepsis, circulatory disease, neonatal hemorrhage are now listed as contributors. But of course, as homeopaths, this is what we've got, homeopathic prophylaxis devised by our Dr. Isaac. I mean, for over 30 years, I've used this in my practice very successfully, never had any adverse reactions. And I can see that this kind of schedule is going to replace what's on offer now. And it'll be successful, it'll be well accepted, and, give that window of protection if that's what you're wanting to do, to allow the children to engage in mumps and measles and chickenpox when they're a little bit older. especially little girls. It's important for them to get them because then they've got antibodies in their placenta and their breast milk. So that doubled. So the MO of Beyfortus, so monoclonal antibodies bind to key receptor sites in infant cells. So they actually increase RSV infections like bronchiolitis. And that's because of antibody detection enhancement. And they can also promote other infections because they lead to immune suppression. So they can have an inflammatory effect on the lungs and they can cause thrombotic pneumonia. And it's really difficult to get data because these inoculations are technically not vaccines. So they're not reported on theirs. And so, you've got to go really digging to get the data on them. But there was something came out in September last year. They said that infants treated with this had a higher mortality rate, different from those treated with different monoclonal antibodies or with a placebo. And they looked at the 3 control trials that had been done originally. And this was a Japanese study. And so what they're saying when they re-looked at the data, they said that, you're talking about hospitalizations are low. Of course they're low. They're low because the babies are dying from the drug itself, particularly thrombosis. So what we need to be looking at is the SIDS rate now, especially when they have the Beyfortus. So we need to be on the lookout for this and wait for the data to come out. It's very concerning. Even more recently, this is in December, the FDA's Vaccine Advisory Committee met to discuss a way forward because Moderna is doing a trial and they pulled it because they had this incident of variant crop up in 12% of the trial participants. So that's vaccine-associated enhanced respiratory disease. So this is a phenomenon which occurs when vaccination promotes immune responses that exacerbate the disease caused by subsequent infection. So, it was meant to protect, but it did the opposite. And vaccine makers are now developing 26 different RSV vaccines using monoclonal antibodies for all age groups, all vying to enter this rapidly expanding market. They say it's going to be worth $13.5 billion by 2030. So you've got an RSV vaccine in India, and it's called Rotovac. And there has been a study come out in that saying that it increases the risk of interception. So you might like to be aware of that. So my contention is the child's immune system doesn't start with a shot. It starts with spending time with the mother. You can have a physiologic birth and then physiologic nurture. You've got 4 years, if mothers breastfeed for that proper time that anthropologists tell us for. Erik Erikson, who was a psychologist in the 60s, and his model, epigenetic stages of man, the 8 of them, I think is fabulous. It really describes well our journey. And what Erikson's saying is if in these early 4 years, if the connection with the mother is good, the baby is going to trust his world. Yeah. So the baby will feel safe. He'll crawl away and come back to the breast. He'll walk away, then come back to the breast. All is well. My mother is there for me. And so by the time he's 4, he's going to go, I'm too old for this, and he's going to win. And he's going to be very happy to go off as an autonomous little being to explore the world. And he'll go and join play groups. He'll go to school, and he'll be really happy to learn. And then when he gets into his teenage years, he's going to have a really good sense of self, because teenage years are terribly confusing. and he's going to make good intimate relationships. He's going to settle down and get a job, be a productive member of society. And then in the latter years, has because of this sense of self and everything that's happened, the possibility of self-realization is very real. But if it hasn't happened, you're stuck in this shadow of psychosis. There is mistrust, there's shame and doubt, a feeling of guilt, a feeling of being inferior, confusion of role, and that's big now with the gender dysphoria, feeling isolated, stagnated, and then the syphilitic miasm will kick in at the end of life. There'll be despair, disgust, then we have to calm back and do it again. That's why you get these rubrics associated with study and school and exams in Lac Humanum and Lac Maternum. Yeah. And it's why you get circles as themes in a lot of the Lacs, because it's to do with karma, particularly Lac Humanum. Big image is the merry-go-round in Lac Humanum. In Lac Maternum, it's the Ferris wheel. So you come in from the bardo and then you come down to Earth. Yeah, you reincarnate. So in my clinic, I've got this poster, and I know you can't read it, but that's not the point. It's very impactful because, in this column, it's got a list of all the things that are in formula. So this is what's on the side of a tin of formula. This is what we know from research is in human milk. Like, it's no contest. Yeah. And when people see that, they go, oh, my goodness me, that is a lot. And I'll just very quickly go through some of these factors because, we haven't got time to go into them all, but we've got A1 antitrypsin, A2 macroglobulin protein, we've got amylase, antioxidants, anti-staphylococcus factor, secretory IgA, protects against all those viruses, IgM and IgG do too, B12 binding protein, bifidus factor, bile-stimulating lipase. We've also got complement cytokines, enzymes, epidermal growth factor, fatty acids, gangliosides, and hormones. Actually, the study just came by my site this week. Looking here, why is this moving not me? So it's this mother-infant linked knowledge. It's a study called Milk. What they've been doing is capturing breast milk from women who go to week-long events, and they're finding that the breast milk changes in this factor here, which is really kind of interesting. So they've got immunoglobulins, more than 30 of them, interferon, interleukin, lactoferrum. So, babies who are breastfed don't have iron issues. Lactopyridoxase, low molecular weight glycosides, the oligosaccharides, which I talked about before, and we've got these peptides. Lymphocytes, lysosome, macrophages, nucleotides, or oligosaccharides, polyamines, and relaxin. So that's quite a lot. It's the most precious substance on the planet. And I mean, in Australia now, the Red Cross are getting women to donate their milk, which they pasteurize, and then they sell it to the hospitals for use in the preemie wards for the babies so that they don't have to have cow's milk formula. And they're charging $2,000 a litre. Yeah, that's what human milk is worth on the open market. So, to breastfeed, women in a year can save enough money to buy a major household appliance, just for 500 calories a day. It's the most ecological, sustainable practice on the planet. It's good stuff. So the other thing about this is that infant formula may have too much aluminium, too much manganese, too much lead, too much cadmium, too much iron, transgenic soy and yeast, and bottle-fed babies consume upwards of 60 grams of added sugars from corn syrup, fructose, and glucose every day. So that's the equivalent of 2 soft drinks. And on top of that, there's traces of algae and fungi, which are used to manufacture the long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids, which are important for brain development. Hexane used to produce the above. Bisphenol A in the can lining, hard plastic bottles used for feeding. And Enterobacter salazar, which is a bacteria, it's found in up to 14% of tins of formula. Benefits to babies: mother and baby share control of the food intake. It's moderated by leptin. Artificially fed babies consume 30,000 more calories than breastfed babies in the first 8 months. And so, you've got there's no comparison really. But then on top of that, you know, we're talking about aphorism number 9 here, and Hanuman's saying we're looking for the higher purpose of existence here. And our highest purpose is to consort with the gods. It's to be self-realized. It's to go to heaven. And I want to share with you that in Sankaran's prover number 13 had this most amazing dream. This is the Lakumanam proving. He went up a flight of stairs and 2 doors were opened and he was received by 2 gods. Remember, 2 is a big theme in Lakumanam. They were there to welcome him. So I have put this rubric into the repertory. Dreams of important people, Lakumanam. And you'll find when people are coming into your clinic and saying, oh, I saw the Queen in the supermarket the other day, or I had dinner with Tom Cruise. So, you know, things like that, where people are saying that they're interacting in a very familiar way with important people. Think of Lakumanam. Because this is all about consorting with the gods, yeah? Being a skywalker. So this all stems from a myth, a Greek myth. Zeus was a naughty boy and he had a lot of babies to earth women. And for any of the offspring, you know, to make it, to become immortal, to join the consort of gods, that is the highest purpose of existence, they actually had to be suckled by Hera in order to obtain that immortality. And so the myth says that when Hera was asleep, and Zeus tried to slip Hercules onto the breast during her sleep so that he would get the benefit of her milk. And she startled and she had a letdown that sprayed across the firmament and it gave way to the Milky Way or the galaxy of stars. That's where that comes from. And the milk, the word for milk in the Greek language is gala. So we have this legend of a love affair with milk. And Carl Sagan says, you know, we are the stuff of stars. You know, we don't take this lightly. And it's really beautifully encapsulated in this painting by Rubens. So you can see, you know, Zeus is in the background just overseeing the process. And, you know, the startle happens. And so the milk sprays across the firmament. But the really interesting thing about this painting is this here, this material. And this is where it comes from. You walk the red carpet. You know, when you go to a gala event, when you mix with the stars, you are on the red carpet. Yep. So I think that's a lovely image. So we're going to have about 10 minutes for questions, so get them ready. So, you know, the question I posed was, is the stipulation outlined in Aphorism 9 attainable? Well, I think the short and long answer is that it is difficult and it's becoming increasingly so. So, you know, we need to keep in mind that conception needs to be physiologic. Yeah, we need to have good folinic acid levels. This is to prevent a midline abnormality. You know, I've outlined how sacred the whole event is. All those initial cell divisions mimic the platonic solids, and then you get the formation of a toroidal field before you get to the zygote phase. So a healthy, viable conception requires an oxytocic milieu, good zinc, and good arginine levels. And then the birth needs to be physiologic if possible. Now, I know that not all births can. I mean, my middle child was born by cesarean because I had placenta previa. Yeah. My placenta was down over my os. They had to cut through my placenta to get my baby out. So when you've got situations like that, or you've got a transverse lie or an abruption in the labor, you know, it will save lives. You know, there's nothing wrong with cesareans, but routine cesareans are now becoming more and more common. And that's sad because we know there's a vaginal birth and the baby negotiates that horrific journey down that birth. It's a very short journey, but the experience for the baby in that is like, I must surely die in this space. That's why their adrenaline levels go way up. And so when they're put on the mother's stomach, their adrenaline levels are so high that they have that energy to crawl up and find the nipple, because it's a matter of survival that they now replace the placenta with something else. And so they're very alert and able to do that. And so the message they get then is, if I struggle, I know I'm going to survive. And Sora then is strong. And that's what you want. And you're going to get that with a really good physiologic vaginal birth. I had a niece who had a baby 2 weeks ago at home, and her baby was born on call. So, that means that in the membranes, and her other 2 children were there, and it was a lovely family event. And so, that baby is going to have an amazing life, beautiful birth, being breastfed like the other 2 were as well. But, it's possible. And I think, with COVID, a lot of women now are going back to wanting home birth and, having midwives be there for them, so that they're not in that hospital setting, A vaginal birth is the optimal experience from the baby. And this provides appropriate seeding of the microbiome. Remember what we said about the immune system coming from the gut. Okay, that's the source of it. And so when the baby's put on the mother's abdomen and is able to search, you'll get perfect latch. I had this case a long time ago of a mother who had a little girl after 2 boys. She had huge nipples. They would have been the size of my thumb. And this little girl was dainty. She just was sucking on the nipple like it was a straw. She didn't like formula. She wanted breast milk, and the mother was expressing for her. And the research about, the crawling up and attaching had just come out. This was a long time ago, about 30 years ago. And I said to the mother, I think that if you go back and mimic the birth, we're going to get this sorted. I said, fill your bath, make sure she's hungry, put her down in the water between your legs and just let her float there for a little bit. Then flip her over and put her on your stomach and let's see what happens. She crawled up and attached. And she never looked back after that, because she crawled up, she was desperate for the feed, and she opened her mouth wide and she attached. So that's what happens in that first golden hour after birth, if everything is just left to do as Mother Nature has intended. So what we need to do is keep all of this, look at the big picture, okay? The skin to skin also keeps the baby warm. The mother is falling more and more in love with her baby, and it's wriggling around. And they've done research on this. The baby wriggling around on the stomach, the oxytocin levels peak. They did research on this in Scandinavia. So, in that first hour, the baby's getting his act sorted. The mother's falling in love with her baby. She's forgetting all about the pain she's been through, and they're a solid unit, and that's what you want. So, just to revisit this, you're going to have more hospitalization, more diarrhea, more respiratory infections, more meningitis, more ear infections, more allergies, more SIDS, more digestive problems, orthopedic problems, diabetes, cholesterol, and autism. So, stop sharing. So there's a lot to consider here. It's not a simple matter. We're living in a very technologically driven world. Mothers and babies are really having a struggle, to get their act together the way nature intended. So as clinicians, we can, help mothers to have a natural conception and a good pregnancy and support them during breastfeeding. The stipulation in Aphorism number 9 is maybe going to be achievable, but otherwise we're really up against it. So that's all I have to share with you in this conversation. So I know it's been a lot, but if you've got any questions, I'll attempt to answer them for you, and or any comments, and we can have a chat about some of the issues that may have come up during the session. So thank you for your time. I think you're muted. I can't hear you.
Yeah. I think we'll wait for the questions to come in. You all can put it in the chat box, or I'll just unmute and you all can speak directly.
Did you want me to mute?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, we have many. Lorna writes, many thanks for your excellent and detailed presentation. Thank you. Any questions? We can take it up from here. There's thank yous coming up. No questions coming up. Quite informative session. Brownwin writes, a child of 3 and mother wants to wean, but child not on board with it at all.
I know it's a bit of a problem, in India with weaning. Pediatricians encourage you to wean by 9 months, but babies really do need to be breastfed for longer. So I don't know what the answer to that is, because it does come back to nutrition and diet. But I guess that's for you to figure out.
Wonder if evolution will somehow help to deal with this.
Well, I'll tell you what will help, and I've been doing this for a long time, is that when a mother is in a situation where she has to wean and the baby's not wanting to wean, so has to go back to work, or the pediatrician has said, you need to wean, I've been getting her to express her milk, and I'm hand succussing up to 7C potency of her milk and giving it to her in a stock bottle, and then a patient dropper bottle as well. And my instructions are to give the baby a night, morning, night every new and full moon up until the age of 4. And if they are sick, you can maybe, give it for the week that they've got the cold or the whatever, along with whatever else you're going to do. Because when a baby's sick and a mother's breastfeeding, she will put the baby on the breast more often. You won't get that dynamic interaction from the remedy, but you will at least get the support. And how to do that is on my website. If you go into Milk Matters, I think in 2019, I've got it there and all the steps. You can just do it in the clinic. It's very easy to do. It's a little bit of an experiment that's out there that's been running now for a long time. So, and I know people all around the world are doing it, which means that there's a lot of Lachumanum being developed, which I think from an energetic point of view is just really wonderful, because I think it is the most important remedy that we do have.
Ma'am, so till what age limit can we use the remedy? Like,
Sorry, I didn't get that.
the way you were saying that the mother can express the milk and you can use it as a support. So till what age limit can it be used?
At what age limit do you stop doing that? 4? The age of 4?
3 to 4, right? So,
Because remember, breastfeeding is supposed to go 6 times the gestation rate, so that's 4.5 years.
okay.
So I just say up until the age of 4, you can use this remedy. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I think that's it for today. I'm so thankful to you, ma'am, for coming up on Homeopathy Musings and
Pleasure.
sharing such important things with us. I'm sure many of us who attended today's session have learned something new, and we are grateful to you for coming up on Homeopathy Musing. We look forward to having more such sessions with you. Thank you all for
Okay.
joining. Thank you, ma'am. So it's one question about the book. How to get the books of yours, ma'am, in India?
If look, I can post you a copy of the first book. That's the Homeopathic Physician's Guide to Lactation, which is actually a textbook about breastfeeding. And you can get that on my website. You can just buy it through my website and I can post it to you. My book, The Lax, is out of print, but I just heard today from Emrys that they're doing a second edition. So you'll be able to get a new edition from Emrys pretty soon, and it's going to have a whole lot of extra stuff in it, a couple of extra milks, and approving that we did a trituration of Vaccination. All the diaries are going to be in it, and all the rubrics in the repertory have been graded.
Okay. Thank you so much, ma'am. We'll be sharing the link of the website with all of you through the email.
Lots and lots of videos on my website that are free to share with patients all about breastfeeding. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, the recording, this is a free session, so it will be uploaded on our YouTube channel and you can get access to it.
Would you be able to send me one for me to put on
Sure,
my
sure,
channel?
sure.
Okay.
Oh, bye.
Okay.
Have a
Bye-bye.
nice day.